Hello, everyone. My name is Maciej Kowalski. I'm a hemp farmer and hemp entrepreneur from Poland. During my travels around the world, I've met plenty of amazing people doing similar or slightly crazier things than I'm doing back at home. And I would like to introduce some of those people to you. And one of the first that came to my mind was Laura Sullivan, who is a hemp farmer and an artist from Vermont. Is that the proper way to introduce you, Laura?
Yeah, that sounds great.
Um, Frankly speaking, the word farmer and the word artist doesn't really often come hand to hand, close to one another. Could you explain a little bit more? Are you more of an artist that do some farming on the side, or you're more of a farmer that is trying to find a artistic side to it, or you're something actually else and a textile advocate or whatever?
Um, yeah, that's a great question. So a lot of artists these days are actually describing themselves as research-based artists. So I think that really summarizes kind of what I'm doing. And I just finished graduate school and I got an MFA, and that was a 2-year program. And during that time, I learned that art can really be anything you want, if you call it art. It can even be invisible. And there were two pieces that really struck me during my time in graduate school. One was this piece called Public Smog by Amy Balkin. And public smog is a park in the atmosphere that fluctuates in size and location based on financial, legal, or political activities that open it for public use. So it's really the idea of just delineating a piece of the atmosphere to kind of reframe the way we think of it. And art like that is really powerful to me. And the overlaps between art and agriculture are many. So I'm kind of just trying to follow in that
But
lineage there.
at the same time, you're talking about invisible forces, which might to some resonate as slightly crazy, but at the same time, you're actually doing very down to earth, real work that has some real life implications that you can actually literally wear your art, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. There's totally that duality and dichotomy. And I guess the other artist I'll mention is this artist named Mel Chin from the 90s. He did a piece called Revival Fields where he found a Superfund site and planted it with hyperaccumulators to clean the soil through phytoremediation. And I think the plants he was using were a datura species, but hemp is also a phytoremediating plant. And he described that whole process as a sculpture carved in reduction. And the final product is decontaminated earth. So I think that one really illustrates the way things can be both concrete and invisible. And it also just highlights like the intricacies of our environment and how everything's connected. And so I love that piece. It really like broke me open to all of what art can be.
And what was the thing that made you work with hemp? Because as I understand, you started being and well, maybe you're born an artist, but at some point you realized that you are or you want to become an artist, and then at some point later in life you decided to become a hemp farmer. What was the trigger that made you a hemp farmer?
Yeah, so I started learning about hemp in 2015 when I was in my undergraduate degree program, and I was kind of working with textiles by then. I'd sort of figured that much out, and I just really gravitated to hemp for all of its amazing qualities and also for like the stigmatization and backlash that it has faced on the global stage. And it just really, something really didn't sit right with me. Just this really, um, really incredible natural material to be just basically prohibited all over the world. And there's all this red tape around growing it that we know about. And I think it was just in that moment I decided like wow, I really want to help promote this material because people don't know like the first two things about it. And I think that it could be really impactful in the coming years um, as we all learn more about global fast fashion and how that's not great and it's just not a trajectory we can continue on. So yeah, I really latched on to hemp probably about 11 years ago. And ever since then, it was kind of just a journey to be working closer with it. I also had a background. I grew up like working on vegetable farms growing up. So I had some of that experience. And it just still took quite a while to be growing hemp for fiber. I did after school, I moved to Vermont to work with hemp, but I was working on CBD farms for a while, for a few many years, before getting linked up with UVM and growing the fiber. Um,
Do
and
you
yeah.
think the CBD market helped the fiber side of things, or rather the opposite, at least on the American market?
That's a good question. Probably some of both. I know that in 2017, we had kind of like a boom and bust situation where a lot of people jumped on the growing hemp for flower bandwagon, and then promises were not necessarily kept by the buyers who persuaded many people to grow for CBD. And then I think that really soured some people's perception, but at the same time, I think just the exposure is helpful because the more people hear about hemp in general, the more inclined they are to listen when you're talking about some of the other potential for it.
But then you said at the beginning that 2015 you were interested in this plant because of the whole demonization of it and whole stereotypes. But at the same time, from my perspective, from my experience, it's actually sort of helping us because otherwise it would just be a boring crop that no one is excited about. And at least in my corner of the world, we're like 8,000 miles apart. Laura is in Vermont, which is, for those of you that don't know the map of the US, further up north than New York, and I'm in Poland, which is like eastern part of Europe. And still on both of those continents, people are sort of excited when they hear about hemp. Is that something that you also witness in Vermont, or is it becoming boring? And if it is becoming boring, is it a good thing or a bad thing?
I think what you said is exactly true. There's definitely sort of like a hype and a personality to hemp that just like it has a certain swag that like you don't hear from cotton or even linen, sorry. Um, and I think that it might just be the right moment in history. It has kind of like that revolutionary spirit, and it's a bit like of an underdog, which a lot of people respond to just for all that it's faced. So I do think that its reputation gives it some cred. And is it helping? Yeah, maybe. I think it's hard to say, but it's very like anti-establishment, and that's also kind of the zeitgeist of the moment.
Well, if I'm not mistaken, you still need FBI footprinting you to be able to
Fingerprints, yeah.
fingerprint. Yeah. So, uh, is it really? Is it the only fiber crop that you need to have fingerprints taken by FBI to grow?
I think definitely, yes.
So back in 2015, if I'm not mistaken, you were not able to grow legally hemp, isn't it?
I think so. Or maybe 2014, I think allowed for universities to do pilot research. Yeah, perhaps. I'm not exactly certain though.
Uh, so you said it might be the right time for hemp to gain momentum, at least on the fiber side of things. And going ahead like 5 or 10 years from now, what would be the end goal, or at least the mid end goal of your activities? What would you like to achieve on the area that you're working with? Because I've seen some piece of clothing that you are working with, some research fields, some R&D equipment for processing. Where is it going? What would make you happy if you reach that milestone when it comes to fiber processing?
Yeah, okay. In 5 years. I think the number one word that comes to mind is just progress, but that's very vague. So let me go into detail. I think that even coming from like a traditional textile background, which I do, um, I find myself in the position to remind people all the time that textiles are just one facet of what can be done with hemp fiber. And in the US, we don't have a lot of infrastructure in place already. And I think that there's a lot of low hanging fruit that I would love to see, like hemp replacing plastic, and uh, like just having a domestic supply of hemp at all, and then seeing where it can fill in the gaps of industry. Um, we can make fuel out of hemp. As I said, we can make plastic out of hemp. I would love to see those types of uses come online, packaging, paper. Um, and I absolutely have aspirations for textiles and specifically long line textiles. But I don't think that those will be first. And I think that it's possible to see it as kind of like an iterative process, where we start with under other industries and then move into textiles. And I do think what's happening with textiles is great. I think that every opportunity to put hemp in clothing is a step in the direction of progress. Um, and it'll just be interesting to see how all of these industries develop, because we're standing on the shoulders of all the giants who came before us and had all the ancestral knowledge and patience to generate textiles. And now we have innovation and new technologies. And I just want to see these things go into the beyond and make things the world has never seen.
And where does Laura Sullivan fit into all of that? Because I assume you will not be running a hemp plastic company, a hemp paper company, hemp fuel company. For you personally, apart from seeing where the industry goes, would you actually? I don't see you as a business person. I mean, you were the one that told me once that you hate capitalism, if I can quote you on that. So I don't expect you to be the standard bearer for making hemp companies, building it, making products. Or am I mistaken?
No, that's true. I'm actually allergic to business. Um, so I really love making clothes. I really love homesteading. My ultimate goal is to just homestead away from everyone. Um, but I really love making clothes and I really love making one of a kind things. So I intend to just keep doing that. And yeah, I'd love to lean more into being an artist and help anyone who wants to do business do
And
that.
I know you're involved in the fiber shed movement, which is, at least in Europe, responsible for some, well, responsible, maybe not the right word, but they're running or cooperating with some mini mills, which are mostly working with wool, but I consider my operation also as a mini mill. We basically have a spinning mill, but it's tiny compared to the industry giants. And then going back to the American soil, you have Laura making single items, you have Fibershed making limited small scale production. But at the same time, the industry is going in a very American full in way. So if we're doing decortication, it has to be 20,000 pounds an hour. Do you think that's the right direction? Or you've mentioned the iterative process, maybe just start smaller, but actually start making end products that people can wear and witness? Or is the American way the proper answer to the problem that we need to do it industrially straight away?
Um, that's a great question. I think that there is room for both. I wouldn't want to tell anyone that they're doing something the wrong way, because I don't consider myself like an expert in that. But I have seen the American industry, yeah, go full steam ahead, like you're saying, on certain things, and not really consult with um, the experts or the people that just it's not it's an idea in theory, and then in practice it's not how it was anticipated to go, with big expensive machines. So I think that um, yeah, that's not the approach that I would take, but people seem to be getting things done in their own time. Um, and I think we can all learn from each other. So if people want to take those risks and we all get to learn from the mistakes, that's helpful. I think just a real limiting factor here is it would be great to see the states get involved with seeing the value of these industries and funding them on the state level. Um, because I know so many people with just great ideas and no funding to implement them. So yeah, it would be nice to see that change.
And you've said that from your perspective, both directions are good simultaneously. So just go small and go big at the same time by different players. Does it also stand true when it comes to the technology? Because you mentioned you're the long line fiber advocate. I'm working with cottonized fiber. I've heard you mention something, a word you made up of woolenization of hemp, which is also an interesting idea. Do you rather see hemp going alone, or is it a better idea to blend it with other fibers from your perspective?
So I think that that's a great question as well. All these have been great questions. Um, I think that we might be in if we were to move like a couple decades into the future, maybe we would look back on this time and see it as sort of like a transitional moment, where we're transitioning from this fossil fuel based lifestyle system, meaning our fuel is fossil fuels, our plastic are made of fossil fuels, et cetera, burning fossil fuels into burning like soil derived fuel bases. And I think that cottonization is emblematic of that transition because we're infiltrating hemp into the textiles, and that represents a positive change because we're reducing our reliance on cotton or other synthetic fibers, perhaps. And so nothing about cottonization is wrong or bad. It's absolutely a move for progress, but it might not be where we end up in a few decades time. And hemp, I think that traditional textilians would be pretty against blending plant and animal fiber. That's something I've heard. Just because they have different properties that kind of cancel each other out. Um, and so I don't I don't know if that's the move, our woolenized hemp vests, but um, hemp, I think as a material, it is quite amazing when it's not blended. But it has certain characteristics that don't allow for that unless you have certain infrastructure because it doesn't, as I understand, like web or whatever the way that wool does. So it needs to be blended at this time in the way we're doing it. But all of this is subject to change. And yeah, that's kind of how I see it. So I'm definitely an advocate for cottonization at this moment in time.
And don't you see, because I have this perspective of being an outsider in the US when I travel there for a couple of weeks and I talk to people, I see like 150 years later after the Civil War ended, still this division between North and South, and the Southern people always saying, well, let's cottonize it, that's the only way forward. And then the guys from Pennsylvania and New England or that corner of the country saying, no, it's 100% or nothing. Do you think it helps to stimulate the the positive competition between those two, or is it actually a recipe for disaster and is going to infighting instead of fighting together against polyester and fossil fuel based fibers?
I've never thought about that, but I think that ultimately it should be just, yeah, like, there shouldn't be internal fighting with anyone who's trying to push hemp or linen fast fibers in production.
And it's the second or third time that you're referring to hemp and linen. I assume you are not one of those hemp advocates that hemp and nothing else. You work with flax as well. Uh, how do you compare those two plants or two fibers? Which is your favorite and why? And do you work with both of them or do you see some differences?
Yeah, so I've been growing hemp. I've grown hemp for 5 years, and I've grown flax for 1 year now. So last year in 2025 was my first time growing flax, although I've been surrounded by flax enthusiasts for quite a while now, just being a part of the fiber shed. And the reason why I refer to them together is because they're both bast fibers, which means that the fiber lives in the stalk, and specifically it lives in like the bark layer or like the outer layer of the stalk. So they can share infrastructure in terms of harvesting equipment, planting equipment, and processing equipment in certain cases, depending on how the hemp is grown and what its end use is. So that's why I kind of group them together. And in terms of my favorite, I would probably say hemp, because we have a special relationship. But growing flax for the first time, it was pretty amazing. Like, it's kind of everything you wish hemp was. It's just so soft and fine and not as strong. So there's that. But I was expecting them to be more similar than they actually are.
Mhm. Well, you've mentioned it's softer, easier to process. I wouldn't really say from my perspective that flax has all the positives I would like to see in hemp, especially in the growing side, because with hemp, you don't really need to care about competition from other weeds. With linen, I assume you need to take some. I'm asking Laura, the farmer now.
Yes.
You need to use some methods to limit the amounts of weeds in a crop. Or
Yeah, that's very true. So hemp will outcompete weeds more than linen will. And especially if you can plant your hemp early on the early side, you'll basically have no issues with weeds, with the exception of like bindweed or a few nasty ones. Um, but for flax, since it is shorter and not as robust in size, it is subject to more pressure from weeds, and like the competition is more fierce. And from what I know about harvesting commercially, the weeds can really be a problem. Some people have like zero tolerance for weeds in their crop, so that is something to consider. We did not spray our crop or anything. I imagine some people do that, but I don't know. But it is a cause for concern. When growing linen, you want a pretty weed-free field.
on the processing side, you mentioned there are some similarities, or actually you can even use the same equipment. So going with the same argument that cottonization advocates are using, like let's just utilize what we already have and just put hemp through that cotton equipment. Is there any linen flax equipment in New England or anywhere in the US that can utilize hemp fiber, or is it in the same situation despite not being demonized and despite not having that drug I don't know the English word for that, but you know what I mean, like it's
Yeah,
not being considered the evil weed or whatever.
yeah. So, yeah, it's in the same boat as hemp. I think that the first scutching mill we'll see come online for linen will happen in Pennsylvania. Um, but yeah, um, we did not maintain any type of linen processing in the US beyond the antique hand tools.
And while preparing for this interview, I saw something that I have not heard about you before, that you were trying or making some hemp masks during the pandemic. So was it a production issue, or was it rather a fun project to make people realize how hemp could be used?
Yeah, so during the pandemic, I was working at a restaurant at that time and I lost my job. So it was just a way to keep working. And what was pretty amazing was I just happened to have everything. Like, I remember at that time, a lot of materials were like selling out because everyone was buying them, like elastic, for example. And I just had everything on hand to respond to that moment, which was really interesting because I think maybe other people can relate to like when a crisis happens and like finding yourselves with like everything you need to fill a void. So it was pretty cool to be doing that for a while. And yeah, they were just hemp because that's what I had.
Right. So there was no reasoning behind it, like hemp has some unique properties that make it useful for masks. It's just like a cellulosic material. And the reason for that was the shortage of other materials, right?
Yeah, it was just the material that I had on hand, and I happened to like already have a website, so people could just immediately buy masks from me, whereas everyone else like took a minute to get set up. But yeah, no, I think I shared all of the great properties of why hemp is a great choice for a mask because yeah, there are those things. Um, but yeah, no, it's just because I don't buy like synthetic fabric, so there was none in my house.
And now there's a trend that I'm seeing on both sides of the Atlantic of hemp farmers growing plenty of acres, decorticating it roughly, and then just baling it and shipping it to China for processing, and importing it back as clothes, saying "made with EU fiber" or
Oh
"made with
wow.
fiber." Is that something that you think is a good transitional step, or is something that's actually going to cement us being supplier of cheap raw materials, and all the value added is happening in outside countries, or is it a necessary step from your perspective?
That's really interesting. I actually hadn't heard that. I think um it sounds sort of like intentionally deceptive. Um so I think one thing that people don't necessarily keep in mind is when we're shipping clothes all over the world, like say they're getting cut in one country and sewn in another country, and then the buttons are added in a third country. Um, all of that has a footprint, and um, it's a little bit deceptive to use the point that it was grown somewhere if it was then shipped across the world to be processed. So I would say for the most part, that's not very positive. I think like just the more transparent we can be, um, in general is the way to combat greenwashing because it's like when you cut off the head of like one greenwashing statement, like five more appear. And I've actually gotten US companies that state on their website like made from linen grown and milled in the US. Like I've gotten those companies to like take that down because I'm like, oh really? Where did you mill it? And I know that there's no such thing as a linen milling facility in the US, and then they'll remove that. That's happened twice. So I think there's a lot of greenwashing, and asking questions is really important because as soon as someone knows that there's no way to fully process a certain fiber in the US, they'll see that label and wonder like, okay, it was made with US hemp, but then what?
And for some, sometimes it happens for a reason of not having processing facilities at hand. So to some extent, from the farmer's perspective, I can understand that he has a choice. Either I grow it and sell it to the Chinese, or I don't grow it because there's no offtake. But in case of the European farmers, it's an intentional process of outsourcing the parts of processing that are not very environmentally friendly, and just let the others do it, and then we're going to import it back because European Union has a very strict regulation on just about anything. US is slightly more liberal, at least depending on the state. So I'm afraid it is intentional and deceptive, and that's something that honest companies are facing. That their competition is just making all those statements. The same goes for does the label actually says what the composition is? Did you have any experiences with hemp products that are hemp in label only, or you don't have the access to the analysis or ways to verify whether a hemp product really is a hemp product?
Um, I don't think I've had one of those experiences specifically. But I saw an image one time that really stuck with me. It was someone who was like an ocean researcher, and she found a shirt that had washed up in the ocean, and all that remained of it was the thread and the tag, which said 100% cotton. But clearly, those two components were not cotton. So there's really so much left off our labels. So it's like, might as well not trust them. Like if it says 100% for sure.
The example you're referring to is actually an honest case of labeling.
Hmm.
The label refers to the fabric itself. Threads and labels are often polyester because they are simply better, technologically speaking, and replacing them with cotton threads would actually lower the lifespan of the product. What I expected to hear when you started this story is that it's going to be a completely intact shirt saying 100% cotton, which is also sometimes the case. And from my perspective, when it comes to hemp, with so many people between the manufacturer and the brand, it's enough for one person to lie, to say something that's not necessarily true. For the brand might actually lie to their consumers unwittingly. They might buy it from in the good faith, but it just happens. So, are you planning to scale up your production, or are you happy with the homesteading size of your operations?
I think I think here in Vermont, I want to be a part of anything that is scaling up. Like I would love to be involved. Um, because again, I want to see hemp actually out in the wild replacing fossil fuel derived materials. That's number one. So anything that I can do to help those processes, I'm interested. But personally, like I also love to be alone, just working on things in my studio. So that I don't think that passion will ever go away.
Yeah, you've got this tiny scratching machine. Is it something that you build, or combing machine? What is it? Is it something that you've built your own, or is it something from the university?
No, so we have a hackler which came from Nova Scotia, Taproot Fiber Lab. So that one came from Canada, and then um we also have a decorticator from Formation Ag, which is out of Colorado, and the rest of our process is by hand. Um, to do all my woolenizing, I was using like a hand crank wool carding machine. Um, so yeah, that's something that could definitely be improved upon.
Going back to the funding at the state level, which you referred to, who is actually funding the work that you're doing, and who is buying the equipment that you're working on? Is it because you said that you would like to see it, but it's actually happening at the state level, or it's not sufficient?
Yeah, so my position is 60% grant funded. So we're an extension program, which means that we are like a land grant university, and our job is to provide like research and education in agriculture. And those projects were funded by the USDA grants. So yeah, that would be at the federal level, just short-term grant funding for, yeah, the
Do you see some
equipment.
changes ahead when it comes to federal funding for hemp products with the current administration?
Yeah, we've definitely seen changes in federal funding. There's certain language that isn't favorable anymore to use. Um, Big bad words that start with C and end with limit. Um, and so we're all sort of navigating that together. I do actually think that there is a way that hemp tucks nicely into the current administration's narrative around wanting to see domestic manufacturing and all of that. But we we don't currently have a grant lined up to pursue that type of funding in the future.
What you've mentioned about the lack of processing equipment for flax and hemp is actually very much in line with the narrative of the administration and like bringing the production back. And honestly, in Poland, we are selling our hemp products made from the Polish grown hemp, and more people are interested in it because of the Polish part of it rather than the hemp part of it. So it might be a way to somehow adjust to the reality of not saying anymore hemp is good because it's good for the planet. No, hemp is good because it's good for the United States of
There
America.
you go. There you go. I love that.
Yeah,
Wait, Maciek, can I ask you a question?
go ahead.
Do you ever feel like you work for hemp?
I sort of do have that approach to life in general, that I'm just here riding the wave of whatever is happening around me. So yeah, hemp came to my life 25 years ago, and just it dictates what I'm doing. So the very fact that I'm working with hemp, with fiber hemp, is also not my choice, really. I mean, I've been the CBD guy, and then I was just left with all of that fibrous material. And after I sold my previous company, I had a non-compete clause on a CBD. So it was like, all right, I want to be working with hemp. Hemp has fiber, so hey, let's just do it. It does have some way of, like, people are asking, is hemp addictive? Well, growing hemp certainly is addictive. Um, there's also one maybe last issue that I wanted to touch is the winter retting part, which is the most uncommon way of processing hemp, which you are one of the few people in the US that sort of experimented with. What is the reason? For those of you who don't know, it means just being lazy enough not to do any processing, any harvesting in autumn or summer whatsoever, and just leaving the stalks standing in a field. I know you've run some experiments, 2 seasons already. What's your take on that? Do you see the potential in it or not really?
Yeah, totally. I think it has some really great qualities to it. Just some things off the top of my head. All you mentioned about the effort and labor that is involved is much less than harvesting in the fall. Also, the color I think tends to be lighter than fall retting, which can be desirable for a lot of reasons. Um, so I love that about it. And those are not small things. Those are really big factors. One thing that I noticed, which was very unexpected, is we were harvesting off two trials that were in the same fields right next to one another. And but one was kind of on like the crest of a hill and the other one was in like a little dip, but they're right next to each other. And I found that they were retting or weathering very differently. So the one at the crest of the hill, all the plants were like doubled over and they were kind of like a rat's nest. It was like a mess to harvest them. The fiber was just streaming in the wind. And then the other trial that was like a little lower in a dip, all those plants were just pencils, no fiber like stripping off of them, much easier to harvest. And um, to find that they were like very differently redded, just having been right next to each other in the field, was surprising. But I think that because the one of the joys of farming is like you just get the one chance in a whole year to try something and then you have to try again next year. I was
Which is
wondering about
different. You don't have controlled.
yeah, yes.
Uh,
Um, I think that if I had just waited a little longer on those ones that were more underredded, they would have caught up. Because I've also noticed that once the weather warms up in the spring, the plants degrade much faster. So it's kind of like they don't change much, say from like February to March, but from beginning of April to end of April, they can really transform. So maybe just holding off on those ones that were a little lower down would have yielded a better result in terms of fiber. But I guess the thing that surprised me about winter redding, just to answer your question, is like how many different results, how the results were different because we also turned those fibers into yarn. We did 6 different yarn trials and they had different characteristics to them. So that was a bit surprising and a huge learning experience.
And as you said, one field right next to another can yield different quality fiber. And then still, I meet some people in the textile industry asking them about hemp, and they said, "No, I touched hemp once. I don't want to work with it." It's like so many different ways to process it, so many different ways to achieve a different hand feel. So. With all the knowledge that you're accumulating in those field trials, are you sharing them with some of the industry players, or you're just doing the research, keeping it to yourself, and then on the other side there are people spending $1 million without that knowledge and actually going into the wrong direction? Or are you cooperating somehow with those guys?
Yeah, so I mean, our job as extension is always to educate farmers. It's kind of one of my favorite things maybe about the job is like it's not my job to keep any secrets. Um, it's quite opposite. My job is to share what I learned. So, for anyone who wants to listen, all of our reports are public. I'm teaching a class on growing hemp, which you're a part of, starting next week, I think. So yeah, anyone who wants me to talk to them about hemp, I'm willing to do so.
And I'm afraid that what you're doing with your hand is messing with the mic.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry. So if any industry player or someone willing to enter the industry seeking out knowledge might contact you and just get it for free, or how does it work?
Yeah, pretty much. They can email me at my university email. And yeah, specific questions are favorable, but I'll basically have a meeting with anyone who asks.
Wonderful. That's a completely different approach to academia than I'm used to in Poland. Like Poland in the ivory towers, you just don't approach them. They're just doing research and just eating public money mostly. And apart from Vermont extension, I know there's one in Cornell, in NCSU in North Carolina. There's Oregon State University. Are you reaching the same or similar conclusions, or are there like geographically diverse and hence different?
I think that we all kind of have different specialties. Like at Cornell, Larry's really interested in seed breeding, which I don't do any of. And then I know that David Suchoff at NC State has some really compelling equipment that I would love to check out. But my focus is really specifically line fiber, and why that matters is because I tend to grow our trials at a relatively high seeding rate. Like our lowest seeding rate, well, our standard seeding rate, like our baseline, is 80 pounds per acre, which is a lot higher than most people do. We have a seeding rate trial where we go from 25 pounds per acre to 150. So we do see those. We do entertain other seeding rates too, but I think that we're all kind of focusing on different things, and when we do get together, we share results. I know that a lot of us are having trouble with like meeting target populations. So seeding for a certain target population and then falling very short of that in the harvest stand counts. So that's been an interesting one to think about with people.
For those of you in Europe, pounds per acre are roughly the same as kilograms per hectare, because like both of them are, so it's crazy. And before we started, you asked me not to use any Polish words, but it's my favorite torture to Americans. Can you pronounce białobrzeskie?
Say it one more time.
Białobrzeskie, the famous Polish.
Białobrzeskie.
Well, that's pretty close, yeah. Much better than David Suchov's then. Thank you very much, Laura. It's always a pleasure to chat with you. If anyone has any questions to Laura, I'm sure she will find some time to answer them if you ask them in the comment sections. I hope to see you soon and actually participate in your class in Vermont. So my guest and your guest was artist and hemp farmer Laura Sullivan from Vermont. Thank you, Laura.
Thanks so much, Maciek. My pleasure.